When you think of McDonald's, you probably picture the golden arches, the smell of French fries, or maybe that jingle you can't get out of your head. It's the largest fast food chain on the planet, over 38,000 locations in more than 100 countries, billions of burgers sold, a brand recognized in every corner of the world. Walk into any city, any country, any continent, and you'll find those familiar golden arches beckoning you with the promise of consistent, affordable food. McDonald's isn't just a restaurant, it's a cultural phenomenon. It's a symbol of American capitalism, globalization, and the power of franchising done right. But here's a question that might surprise you. Who actually owns McDonald's today? And more importantly, who inherited the fortune behind those golden arches? When you think about massive family fortunes, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, you imagine dynasties that span generations, mansions passed down, trust funds, heirs living off the wealth created by their ancestors. So surely the McDonald's fortune must work the same way, right? There must be some incredibly wealthy McDonald family out there, living in luxury, controlling the empire that bears their name. If you said the McDonald family, you'd be completely wrong. In fact, the story of McDonald's inheritance is one of the most fascinating, complex, and misunderstood tales in American business history. It's a story that involves two brothers with a revolutionary dream, a milkshake machine salesman with ruthless ambition, and a series of decisions that would change the course of billions of dollars and completely rewrite the legacy of an entire family. This isn't a simple rags to riches story. This is a story about vision and blindness, about innovation and exploitation, and about the people who create something extraordinary and the people who take it to heights the creators never imagined or never wanted. This isn't just about money, though there's plenty of that. It's about vision, betrayal, missed opportunities, and the harsh reality that sometimes the people who build empires aren't the ones who get to keep them. Sometimes the person who has the original idea gets left behind. Sometimes the person willing to sacrifice everything, to work harder, to be more ruthless, ends up with the crown. And sometimes that crown gets given away entirely. So let's go back to where it all started, to a small burger stand in San Bernardino, California, in the late 1940s, to two brothers named Richard and Maurice McDonald, who had an idea that would change the food industry forever, and to the man who would take their name, their concept, and their future and turn it into the most valuable fast food franchise in history. A man named Ray Kroc, a man who saw what the brothers couldn't or wouldn't see. This is the untold story of the McDonald's inheritance. The story of who built it, who bought it, who profited from it, and who ultimately gave it all away. And trust me, it's not what you think. By the end of this, you'll understand why the McDonald's fortune is one of the most unusual inheritance stories in modern history. You'll see how a few critical decisions made over half a century ago determined who would become billionaires and who would be forgotten. You'll discover that the Golden Arches, despite bearing the McDonald name, have almost nothing to do with the McDonald family anymore. This is a story about the American dream, but it's also a story about the American reality. Let's begin. The year is 1948. Post-war America is booming. The economy is surging. Soldiers have returned home, families are growing, and the country is experiencing one of the most prosperous periods in its history. Families are moving to the suburbs in droves. The automobile has become a staple of American life. Nearly every household has a car. The highway system is expanding, and with this new mobility comes a new lifestyle. People want convenience, they want speed, they want food that's fast, affordable, and consistent. The era of the drive-in restaurant is beginning, and entrepreneurs all over the country are trying to capitalize on this cultural shift. In San Bernardino, California, two brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald, are running a small drive-in restaurant. They'd opened it back in 1940, and it was doing okay. Not great, but okay. Nothing particularly special. It was a typical drive-in of the era. You'd pull up, a car hop would come to your window, take your order, and bring it out to you. The menu was extensive: burgers, hot dogs, barbecue, and more. It took a while to prepare. Sometimes customers waited 30 minutes or more. It was fine. People were used to it. But the brothers were observant. They noticed something. Most of their revenue came from hamburgers, not the barbecue, not the hot dogs, hamburgers. And they noticed something else. The process was incredibly inefficient. The kitchen was chaotic. Orders got mixed up. Service was slow. And labor costs were high because they needed so many car hops and kitchen staff. Then they had an idea. What if they stripped down the menu to just the essentials? What if they eliminated the car hops and made it self-service? What if they made the kitchen work like an assembly line, like Henry Ford had done with automobiles? What if they could serve a burger, fries, and a drink in 30 seconds instead of 30 minutes? In 1948, they closed the restaurant for several months and completely redesigned it. They got rid of most of the menu. They focused on 9 items: hamburgers, cheeseburgers, French fries, shakes, soft drinks, coffee, milk, and pie. That's it. They redesigned the kitchen to function like a factory. Each worker had one specific task. One person did nothing but grill burgers. Another put on condiments. Another wrapped them. It was an assembly line for food. They called it the Speedy Service System. And when they reopened, it was an absolute sensation. Customers could get their food in seconds. The quality was consistent. The prices were incredibly low, 15 cents for a hamburger. Lines formed around the block. Families came back week after week. Word spread. The McDonald brothers had stumbled onto something revolutionary. They'd invented fast food as we know it today. By the early 1950s, their restaurant was making over $350,000 a year. Enormous money for a single location at that time. They were comfortable. They were successful. And importantly, they were content. A few people approached them about franchising. They even sold a handful of franchises, but they didn't pursue it aggressively. Franchising sounded like a headache. It meant travel. It meant oversight. It meant risk. The brothers were in their 40s and 50s. They had enough money. Why complicate things? Enter Ray Kroc. In 1954, Ray Kroc was a 52-year-old milkshake machine salesman living in Chicago. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't particularly successful. He'd had a series of jobs throughout his life: piano player, paper cup salesman, real estate agent. Nothing had really taken off. He was selling multi-mixers, machines that could make 5 milkshakes at once. Most restaurants ordered 1, maybe 2. Then he got an order that made him curious. A restaurant in San Bernardino, California, had ordered 8 multi-mixers. 8. That meant they were making 40 milkshakes simultaneously. Kroc had to see this place for himself, so he drove out to California. What he found changed his life. He watched the McDonald brothers restaurant operate. He saw the lines, he saw the efficiency, he saw families leaving happy, he saw the potential. And he saw something the brothers didn't seem to see, that this concept could be replicated anywhere. Not just in San Bernardino, not just in California, everywhere. Thousands of locations, millions of customers, an empire. He approached the brothers with a pitch. Let me be your franchising agent. Let me handle all the work. You keep collecting royalties. I'll build this into something national. The brothers were skeptical, but Kroc was persistent. He wore them down. Finally, they agreed. In 1955, Ray Kroc opened the first franchised McDonald's in Des Plaines, Illinois. And from that moment, he became obsessed. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He micromanaged every detail: the cleanliness of the restaurants, the temperature of the fryers, the angle of the golden arches. He built a training system. He created an operations manual. He made sure every McDonald's, no matter where it was, delivered the exact same experience. The expansion began. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. By 1960, there were over 200 McDonald's locations. Kroc was building an empire. But here's the problem. The deal he had signed with the McDonald brothers gave him only a tiny percentage of the profits. Most of the money went to them. And Kroc? He was barely breaking even. He was working himself to death, and the brothers were collecting checks. Ray Kroc hated that, and he was about to do something about it. By the early 1960s, McDonald's was growing at an astonishing rate. Hundreds of locations across the United States, millions of dollars in revenue. The brand was becoming a household name. Families across America were discovering the convenience and affordability of McDonald's. The golden arches were becoming as recognizable as the Statue of Liberty. This was the dawn of a fast food revolution, and McDonald's was leading the charge. But Ray Kroc had a serious problem. Despite all his work, despite the 18-hour days, despite building the infrastructure that made this explosive growth possible, he wasn't getting rich, not even close. In fact, he was struggling financially. Why? Because of the deal he had signed with the McDonald brothers back in 1955. That contract gave the brothers a royalty of 0.5% on all gross sales from franchised locations. That might not sound like much, but when you're talking about hundreds of restaurants doing millions in sales, it adds up fast. The brothers were collecting enormous checks without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, Kroc's cut was minuscule. After paying expenses, salaries, real estate costs, and everything else required to run the franchising operation, Kroc was barely scraping by. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about control. The McDonald brothers still owned the McDonald's name. They still had veto power over major decisions. If Kroc wanted to add a new menu item, he needed their approval. If he wanted to change the design of the restaurants, he needed their approval. And the brothers? They were conservative. They didn't want to move too fast. They didn't want to take big risks. They were happy with the way things were. Ray Kroc was not a man who liked being told no. He was not a man who liked being slowed down. And he certainly wasn't a man who enjoyed watching other people get rich off his work. The resentment grew. The frustration mounted. Something had to change. Then, in 1961, an opportunity presented itself. Kroc had been exploring ways to buy out the brothers for some time, but they'd always resisted. They liked their arrangement. Why sell when the royalty checks kept rolling in? But Kroc was persistent. He kept pushing. He made it clear that if they didn't sell, he'd find a way to cut them out entirely, maybe by rebranding, maybe by legal maneuvering. The pressure was mounting. Finally, the brothers agreed to negotiate. They wanted $2.7 million for their share of McDonald's. It was an enormous sum at the time, roughly equivalent to $27 million today. For two guys who'd started with a single burger stand, it seemed like a fortune. They could retire, live comfortably, maybe even luxuriously. No more headaches, no more dealing with franchisees or lawyers, just cash in the bank and peace of mind. Kroc agreed to the price, though it nearly bankrupted him to come up with the money. He had to borrow heavily. He had to leverage everything he had, but he did it. In 1961, the deal was signed. For $2.7 million, the McDonald brothers sold their entire stake in McDonald's. They handed over the name, the rights, the royalties, everything. Ray Kroc now owned McDonald's outright. But here's the twist that most people don't realize, that $2.7 million had to be split between the two brothers. And then, of course, there were taxes, lots of taxes. After everything was said and done, each brother walked away with roughly $1 million. $1 million. That's still a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But remember, this was 1961. McDonald's was just getting started. The real explosion of growth was still to come. Over the next 2 decades, Ray Kroc kept building. He refined the business model. He expanded internationally. He turned McDonald's into a cultural icon. By the time he died in 1984, McDonald's was worth billions. The brand was global. And Kroc's personal fortune? It was estimated at over $500 million at the time of his death. Adjusted for inflation, and considering the growth of McDonald's stock over the years, The wealth connected to Ray Kroc's vision would eventually be tied to a brand worth over $200 billion in market value. The McDonald brothers? They didn't see any of that growth, not a dime. They sold at the worst possible time, right before the explosion. And they knew it. Richard McDonald, in interviews later in life, admitted that selling was probably the biggest financial mistake they ever made. But at the time, it seemed like the smart move. How could they have known McDonald's would become what it became? So here's the question that everyone asks. Did the McDonald brothers make a mistake? Or were they simply outmaneuvered by a man who saw the future more clearly than they did? And more importantly, who actually inherited the McDonald's fortune when Ray Kroc died? The answer to that question is where this story gets truly fascinating. Because Ray Kroc didn't have children, so when he passed away in 1984, his massive fortune didn't go to a son or daughter. It went to someone else entirely. Someone who would do something with that money that absolutely no one expected. Let's be very clear about something fundamental to this story. The McDonald brothers didn't inherit anything from McDonald's. They didn't pass down a dynasty. They didn't leave behind a family empire. They sold their stake in 1961 and walked away with their payout. And while $2.7 million was absolutely life-changing money at the time, the kind of money that could set up your family for generations if managed wisely, it was absolutely nothing compared to what McDonald's would eventually become. Richard McDonald lived until 1998. He watched McDonald's grow into a global phenomenon from the sidelines. In interviews, he was gracious but clearly regretful. He'd see McDonald's commercials on TV. He'd drive past McDonald's restaurants in his town. Every golden arch was a reminder of what could have been. Maurice, his brother, had passed away much earlier, in 1971. Their descendants inherited what remained of that original buyout, money that had been invested and managed over the years, but nothing close to the scale of wealth that Ray Kroc's side of the story would generate. We're talking millions versus billions. A comfortable inheritance versus world-changing wealth. But Ray Kroc didn't have children. He'd been married 3 times. His first 2 marriages ended in divorce. By the time he became truly wealthy, he was married to his 3rd wife, a woman named Joan Kroc. And this is where the story takes a turn that almost no one sees coming. Joan Kroc was born Joan Mansfield in 1928 in St. Paul, Minnesota. She came from a modest background. She worked as a pianist, playing in restaurants and bars to make ends meet. She met Ray Kroc in 1957 when he walked into a restaurant in St. Paul where she was performing. At the time, Ray was still married to his 2nd wife, but he was immediately smitten with Joan. Their relationship was complicated. Ray eventually divorced his 2nd wife, and he married Joan in 1969. By all accounts, Joan was a fascinating, compassionate, and deeply principled woman. She cared about social justice. She cared about peace. She was troubled by poverty, inequality, and violence. And when Ray Kroc died in 1984, she inherited nearly his entire fortune, over $500 million, plus ongoing income tied to McDonald's through stock holdings and various financial arrangements. Now, most people in Joan's position would have done what wealthy people typically do: buy mansions, travel the world, live in luxury, set up trust funds for relatives, build a family legacy. But Joan Kroc did something radically different. She decided to give almost all of it away. And we're not talking about token donations. We're talking about billions of dollars distributed over the course of her lifetime and after her death. Joan Kroc became one of the most generous philanthropists in American history, and yet most people have never heard of her. She didn't seek publicity. She didn't name buildings after herself. She just quietly gave away a fortune that would have made her one of the wealthiest women in the world. Let me give you some numbers so you understand the scale. In 1984, shortly after Ray died, Joan donated $5 million to the fight against Alzheimer's disease. She gave 15 million to diabetes research. She donated millions to organizations fighting alcoholism and drug addiction, causes close to her heart because Ray had struggled with alcohol. But those were just the beginning. In 2003, the year she died, Joan Kroc made a donation to NPR, National Public Radio, of over $200 million. It remains the largest gift in NPR's history. That single donation transformed the organization. Then she gave $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army to build community centers across the United States. These centers would provide recreation, education, and services to underserved communities. Over 25 centers were built with her money, serving millions of people. She gave hundreds of millions to Catholic charities, medical research, universities, peace organizations, and homeless shelters. She funded initiatives to combat nuclear proliferation. She supported programs for children and families. By the time Joan Kroc died in 2003 at the age of 75, she had given away nearly $3 billion. $3 billion. And her will included instructions to distribute the remainder of her estate to carefully chosen organizations. Almost nothing went to distant relatives or private heirs. Think about that for a moment. The McDonald's fortune, the empire built on billions of burgers, didn't create a dynasty of spoiled heirs living off trust funds. It didn't result in some mega-wealthy McDonald or Kroc family controlling industries and influencing politics. Instead, it was redistributed to society, to hospitals, to community centers, to research labs, to organizations fighting for peace and justice. Joan Kroc's legacy is etched into communities across America, but her name isn't on billboards. The Kroc name is attached to community centers, not luxury skyscrapers, to scholarships, not yachts, to foundations helping the vulnerable, not private islands. And the McDonald brothers? Their legacy is complicated. Richard died in 1998 at the age of 89. He lived a comfortable but quiet life. Maurice had died decades earlier. Their children and grandchildren received inheritances from the original buyout money, managed and invested over the years. Some reports suggest the descendants are financially comfortable, certainly better off than the average American family. But they're not billionaires. They're not running empires. Most of them live relatively private lives, far from the spotlight. So when people ask, who owns McDonald's today? The answer is simple: shareholders. McDonald's is a publicly traded company. Its stock is owned by millions of investors around the world: pension funds, mutual funds, individual investors. No single family controls it. No royal bloodline sits on a throne of Big Macs collecting tribute from franchisees around the globe. But the legacy of how that wealth was created, captured, and ultimately redistributed, that's a story about vision, timing, and the cold, hard truth that in business, the person who scales the idea often ends up with far more than the person who invented it. There's a moment in this story that defines everything, a single decision that encapsulates the entire saga of McDonald's. It happened in 1961, during the final negotiations between Ray Kroc and the McDonald brothers over the buyout. The brothers had agreed to sell for $2.7 million. The lawyers were drawing up the contracts. The deal was almost done. But the brothers had one last request. One condition they wanted included: they wanted to keep their original San Bernardino restaurant, the very first one. The birthplace of the speedy service system, the place where the entire concept had been born. They didn't want to franchise it under the McDonald's corporate umbrella. They didn't want Ray Kroc controlling it. They just wanted to keep it as their own. They'd already decided they wouldn't even call it McDonald's anymore. They'd rename it to avoid any conflict. They just wanted that piece of their history to remain theirs. It seemed like a reasonable request. After all, they'd built that restaurant with their own hands. It was where they'd spent years perfecting their system. It had sentimental value. And from Kroc's perspective, what difference did it make? He was getting the national brand. He was getting the franchising rights. He was getting everything that mattered. Why not let two aging brothers keep one little restaurant in California? Ray Kroc agreed. Verbally, he told them they could keep it, but, and this is crucial, he never put it in writing. The final contract made no mention of the San Bernardino restaurant. The brothers, trusting Kroc's word, didn't push the issue. They signed the deal. And then Ray Kroc did something that revealed exactly who he was, something ruthless, something that would haunt the McDonald brothers for the rest of their lives. He opened a brand new McDonald's just 1 block away from the brothers' original restaurant. Same menu, same system, same golden arches, but this one was his. This one was officially part of the McDonald's Corporation. Think about the calculated cruelty of that move. The brothers had kept their restaurant just as Kroc had promised. They renamed it the Big M to avoid trademark issues. They tried to keep operating, but how could they possibly compete? Right down the street was a gleaming new McDonald's with the full weight of a national marketing campaign behind it. The same food, the same prices, but with the McDonald's name that was now becoming famous across the country. Customers naturally gravitated to the real McDonald's. Why go to some place called the Big M when you could go to the McDonald's you'd heard about on TV? The brothers' restaurant struggled, revenue dropped, the lines disappeared. Within a few years, the Big M closed for good. The original McDonald's, the restaurant that started it all, was gone, erased. And in its place stood Ray Kroc's version of history. That moment tells you everything you need to know about Ray Kroc. He was brilliant, yes. He was driven, absolutely. He had vision and an almost superhuman work ethic. But he was also willing to crush the very people who had given him his opportunity. He was willing to betray a verbal agreement. He was willing to rewrite history to suit his narrative. In Kroc's mind, the McDonald brothers were obstacles. They'd had their chance. They'd sold out. And if they wanted to keep playing in the game, they'd have to compete like everyone else. To be fair to Kroc, this is how many great business empires are built. You don't build a global corporation by being nice. You don't dominate an industry by worrying about hurt feelings. Kroc saw the brothers as small-time operators who didn't have the vision or hunger to take McDonald's to the next level. And he was probably right. The brothers were content with their success. They didn't want to spend their lives traveling the country, managing franchisees, dealing with lawyers and investors. They wanted a comfortable life, they got their payout, and they walked away. But Kroc wanted more. He wanted empire, he wanted legacy. He wanted his name, and the McDonald's name, to be known around the world. And he achieved that. By the time Ray Kroc died, McDonald's was in dozens of countries. It was serving millions of customers every single day. It had become a symbol of American culture. Love it or hate it, McDonald's was everywhere. But here's the dark irony. Ray Kroc spent his entire life building McDonald's. He sacrificed his health, his relationships, everything. He worked into his 80s. And when he finally died in 1984, his fortune went to his wife, Joan, who then spent the next 2 decades giving it all away. All that ruthlessness, all that ambition, all those sacrifices, and the money ended up funding community centers and public radio. Meanwhile, the McDonald brothers, who'd been pushed out, humiliated, and largely forgotten, at least got to live out their lives in relative peace. They didn't have empires, they didn't have legacies carved in marble. But they also didn't have ulcers from 18-hour workdays. They didn't have the weight of a global corporation on their shoulders. So who really won? That's the question this story forces you to ask. Is it better to have the vision and make the billions, even if you sacrifice everything? Or is it better to take your payout, live comfortably, and let someone else carry the burden of empire? There's no easy answer. But that moment in 1961, when Kroc opened that McDonald's 1 block away from the brothers' original restaurant, that moment crystallizes the entire story. It's the moment when the McDonald brothers lost McDonald's forever. Not just financially, not just legally, but symbolically. Their creation was no longer theirs. It belonged to Ray Kroc, and soon it would belong to the world. So let's bring this entire story full circle and answer the question we started with. Who really inherited the McDonald's fortune? The answer is more complex and more fascinating than you probably imagined when we began this journey. The McDonald brothers, Richard and Maurice, sold their entire stake in McDonald's in 1961 for $2.7 million. After splitting that amount and paying taxes, each brother walked away with approximately $1 million. That's roughly $12 million in today's money per brother, not a small amount by any means. Enough to live very comfortably for the rest of their lives. And they did. They invested the money wisely. They lived in nice homes. They didn't want for anything, but they also never saw the explosion of wealth that came afterward. They didn't participate in McDonald's going public. They didn't own stock that multiplied in value 100 times over. They didn't get to watch their net worth grow into the hundreds of millions or billions. Their descendants, their children and grandchildren, inherited what remained of that original buyout money, managed and grown through careful investment over the decades. By most accounts, the McDonald descendants are financially comfortable. They're not struggling, but they're also not among the super wealthy elite. They're not on Forbes lists. They're not buying sports teams or private islands. The McDonald brothers lived long enough to see what McDonald's became, and they had to live with the knowledge of what they'd given up. Richard McDonald, in particular, seemed to carry that weight. In interviews late in his life, he was gracious and philosophical, but you could sense the regret. He'd see McDonald's everywhere, on every highway in every town, and know that it had all started with him and his brother, and that they'd let it slip away for a fraction of what it was worth. Maurice died in 1971, less than a decade after the sale. He was 69 years old. Richard lived much longer, passing away in 1998 at the age of 89. He spent his final decades in quiet retirement, watching from a distance as the brand that bore his family name became the most recognizable restaurant chain on earth. Ray Kroc, on the other hand, spent every waking moment of the rest of his life building McDonald's. He was obsessed. It consumed him. He worked into his 80s, refusing to slow down even as his health declined. And the empire he built was staggering. By the time of his death in 1984, McDonald's had over 7,500 locations in 32 countries. The company was doing billions in annual revenue, and Kroc's personal fortune was estimated at over $500 million, worth well over $1 billion in today's money. But here's the twist that changes everything. Ray Kroc had no children, no direct heirs to pass his empire to, so when he died, his entire fortune went to his third wife, Joan Kroc. And Joan, as we've discussed, was cut from a completely different cloth than her husband. While Ray had been ruthless, calculating, and singularly focused on business success, Joan was compassionate, generous, and deeply concerned with social justice. And what did Joan do with the McDonald's fortune? She gave almost all of it away, not over generations, not slowly, through modest charitable donations. She gave away billions of dollars in one of the most extraordinary acts of philanthropy in modern American history. $200 million to NPR, $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army, hundreds of millions to medical research, peace initiatives, education programs, homelessness prevention, and addiction recovery services. By the time Joan Kroc died in 2003, she had distributed nearly $3 billion to causes she believed in. Her will directed that the remainder of her estate continue that work. Very little went to private heirs or family members. Today, if you want to see where the McDonald's fortune ended up, you don't look for mansions in Beverly Hills or yachts in Monaco. You look at Kroc centers, community facilities built with Joan's money that serve millions of people across the United States. You look at the transformed landscape of public broadcasting, made possible by her historic donation. You look at medical research facilities and homeless shelters and peace organizations that exist because Joan Kroc believed wealth should serve humanity, not just accumulate. And McDonald's itself It's now a publicly traded company worth over $200 billion. It's owned by millions of shareholders around the world, pension funds, mutual funds, individual investors. No single family controls it. The McDonald name is on the restaurants, but the McDonald family has no ownership stake. The Kroc name is associated with its history, but there's no Kroc dynasty running the show. What remains is a brand, a system, a global phenomenon that transcends any individual or family. McDonald's has become bigger than the people who created it. It's become a piece of the cultural landscape, recognized and debated and consumed by billions of people who have no idea who Richard and Maurice McDonald were or what Ray Kroc sacrificed to build his empire. So what's the real takeaway from this story? What can we learn from the strange, tragic, inspiring saga of the McDonald's inheritance? First, having a great idea isn't enough. The McDonald brothers had a revolutionary concept. They invented fast food as we know it, but they didn't have the vision, or perhaps the desire, to scale it globally. Ray Kroc did. Execution and scale often matter more than the original idea. The person who takes something from good to great, from local to global, often ends up with more than the person who invented it. Second, timing is absolutely everything in business and in life. The McDonald brothers sold at what seemed like the perfect time. They were getting older. They wanted to retire. $2.7 million was an unimaginable fortune, but they couldn't see what was coming. They couldn't predict that McDonald's would become a global empire worth billions. Sometimes you make the rational decision with the information you have, and it still turns out to be the wrong decision. That's not failure, that's just life. Third, wealth and legacy are not the same thing. Ray Kroc became fabulously wealthy, but he worked himself to the bone to get there. He sacrificed relationships, health, and peace of mind. The McDonald brothers took their money and lived quiet, comfortable lives. Who had the better life? That's a question each person has to answer for themselves. And Joan Kroc's decision to give it all away adds yet another dimension. She had access to unimaginable wealth, and she chose to use it to make the world better. Her legacy isn't mansions or private jets. It's community centers and research facilities and programs that help millions of people. And finally, this story reminds us that inheritance isn't just about money, it's about what you do with what you're given. The McDonald brothers took their inheritance, their payout from the sale, and lived well. Ray Kroc inherited an idea from the McDonald brothers, built it into an empire, and died wealthy but exhausted. Joan Kroc inherited that empire's fortune and gave it away to serve humanity. Each made different choices. Each left a different kind of legacy. Today, when you drive past those golden arches, you're looking at something that belongs to everyone and no one. The McDonald family doesn't own it. The Kroc family doesn't control it. It's a publicly traded corporation, a global brand, a cultural touchstone. But the story of how it came to be and who profited from it is a reminder that in capitalism, the spoils don't always go to the inventor. They go to the person with the vision to scale, the ruthlessness to compete, and sometimes the wisdom to give it all away. The golden arches don't belong to any one family anymore. In a strange, unexpected way, they belong to all of us. And the fortune they generated, it's been scattered to the winds, invested in communities, research, and causes that touch millions of lives. That's not the inheritance story anyone expected, but it might be the most meaningful one of all.